Johannesburg, this is Tonight with Jane Dutton. Tonight, Zimbabwe begins a new chapter. Robert Mugabe, the former strongman, now just a citizen. With his one vote having the same weight as everyone else, who will be the next president? Was this a free and fair election? Tonight, both local and EU observers tell us what they saw while watching the polls. Now, what does this mean for Zimbabweans here in South Africa? Do these elections open a door, allowing them to head home? This is Tonight with Jane Dutton. The polls have closed now. We just wait for results. The future of Zimbabwe unknown. Whatever the results will they be credible? That's my question. What's yours? Tweet us with hashtag Tonight with Jane Dutton. We'll head live to Harare and Bulawayo shortly, but first, Kathy runs us through all the latest. Kathy.
Well, thanks for that, Jane. A brief look at some of the stories making headlines today. We begin here. Of course, Zimbabwe continues to dominate our headlines. Voting stations in that country closed just a little over an hour ago. Here's what some of the 23 presidential candidates had to say after casting their ballots.
I've said that we have won this election. I'm only here to confirm that we are ready to lead, we are ready to govern, we are ready for a new Zimbabwe.
I felt very confident in the first place that the candidates that I have voted for will make it. It's a great day. It's a decider as to whether Zimbabwe goes forward or remains stuck in the problems that it is facing today. And I hope this is what people are going to be voting for. Voting as to whether we should have a new fresh start, as I demonstrated in November last year, or whether we should remain with the status quo and with all the problems that Zimbabweans face today.
We've had a very good campaign that took us all around the country. Of course, there are big political parties like the well-established ones. We're a fairly new party that just started last year in October. So we appreciate the response that we have so far.
I'm happy that both the process for campaigning was peaceful. The voting today is peaceful. I have no doubt that the end process of the entire electoral process will remain peaceful.
Also at the voting stations today, former President Robert Mugabe casting his vote for the first time as an ordinary Zimbabwean citizen. He arrived at Mofu Primary School in the Highfield suburb of Harare at around 1 o'clock. Mugabe was accompanied by his wife Grace and their bodyguards. He was greeted warmly by those at the polling station. The former president has thrown his support behind anyone opposing his former ZANU-PF party, that is. This is the first election since he was ousted in November. Well, the former Zimbabwean First Lady, Grace Mugabe, was by her husband's side casting her vote too, but she now also has a legal battle to deal with. The South Gauteng High Court says the South African government's decision to grant her diplomatic immunity was unconstitutional. The decision has been set aside. Mugabe is accused of assaulting a young woman, Gabriela Engels, at a Sandton hotel last August. She was allowed to leave the country without facing prosecution.
As the decision is inconsistent with the Constitution of the Republic of South Africa Act 108 of 1996. 2, the decision is reviewed and set aside. 3, the minister is to pay the cost of the applicants in both cases, which costs are to include those occasioned by the employment of 2 counsel. 4, the minister is to pay the cost of 1 counsel for each of the amici. That's the order.
Well, that's where we wrap up the day's main story for tonight. Jane, it's over to you. Have a great show.
Thanks a lot for that, Kathy. Just to remind you that 22 candidates are vying for the country's top job in Zimbabwe's first election post-Robert Mugabe. eNCA's Tulazizwe Simelani brings us this report from Zimbabwe.
A highly anticipated, historic vote expected to bring about change. Millions of hopeful Zimbabweans are casting their votes yet again. The enormity of the moment did not escape thousands of voters who were already queuing outside polling stations before sunrise. The country's leaders also cast their ballots at various locations. President Emmerson Mnangagwa cast his vote in Chirumanzu outside Harare. He rode to power after successfully dethroning longtime leader and former ally Robert Mugabe in a coup last year. Mnangagwa says he is happy with the peaceful process.
I'm happy that both the process for campaigning was peaceful. The voting today is peaceful. I have no doubt that the end process of the entire electoral process will remain peaceful.
His biggest challenger, MDC leader Nelson Chamisa, voted at a primary school in Kuwadzana in Harare. Chamisa is confident that he will come out victorious.
I've said that we have won this election. I'm only here to confirm that we are ready to lead, we are ready to govern, we are ready for a new Zimbabwe.
The excitement, however, was in Highfield, Harare, where former President Mugabe voted. Accompanied by his wife, Grace, Mugabe took his time in the voting booth. More than 5 million Zimbabweans registered to vote at over 10,000 polling stations that opened today. People propelled to go and vote by their hopes, dreams and aspirations and fears about this country. And yet, somehow the spotlight for a moment falling once again on the man who has for the past 4 decades come to define Zimbabwean politics. Former President Robert Mugabe coming out here to vote in Highfield, now as a civilian, marking the end of an era, but is a new Zimbabwe, a better Zimbabwe, ready to be born.
Well, it's certainly been a tough few years for our neighbouring country. On the eve of the elections, eNCA's Aldrin Sampear took to the streets of Harare to bring us the story.
The lack of cash in Zimbabwean banks is well reported, but on this street, in the informal black market, you find more people opting to go to vendors like this. Just use your dollar, whatever currency you have, in exchange for a local currency. So just quickly tell us, why are people so interested in this market than the formal market?
You see, now you give me $10 and in exchange I'll give you 12 bond, 12 Zim dollars. But as compared to the bank, when you have this $10 US, it's equal to the 10 bond. So here you have $2 on top. That's why people prefer to come here and do the exchange at the black market other than the bank.
It's also in this black market that we meet Menashe. Okay, so tell me, why did you decide to come and do this?
It's because we have no money in the society, so we're trying to fend for ourselves. I could fend for my family, yes.
The 22-year-old and his brother dropped out of school to search for work, and now earn as little as $3 a day selling shoes. But you don't want to be doing this, eh?
Obviously. I want to be in school, obviously. I don't want to be in the streets, because this is not predictable.
And your family, how do they feel?
It's something else, my friend. I don't want to lie. You could see the whole thing, the whole family setup. It's not a proper family setup.
And so we head out to go see the family. The road leading to Chitungwiza bears evidence of dire poverty and promises of change everywhere. It's here at this house that we meet Menashe's unemployed father, who now has to rely on his sons for an income.
Yeah, it hurts. feel embarrassed, I'm not even happy. It's like sometimes you even cry when you're on. You go in the corner, you cry, and it's like this is not what we were expecting actually.
Expectations rooted in the hopes brought by April the 18th, 1980, Independence Day.
We were expecting more changes. It's like before we had these whites ruling us, things were a bit different. There was more abuse. In fact, things were not right for blacks actually.
Fast forward 3 decades later, 2008, under black-led government, hopes were deferred.
There was more poverty, there was no food, no fuel. People used to chase trucks to get maize, and in some areas there, when it comes to campaigning, something like that, people were being beaten, some houses were being burnt.
The economy took a knock, the ripple effect dire. Israel lost his job.
First of all, I had cancer, and it's like for almost 7 years, and I couldn't find money to go to hospital. And up to now, until I get involved in an accident actually, and the bills for hospital bills, they're too high.
Now, this father of 5 could lose his house too.
The property, what they said, would attach the property to cover the cost for the medical.
For Israel, the 30th of July reignites the dreams and aspirations of Independence Day.
With this election here, I think things will go, we hope for a change actually. I hope for a change.
Israel's sons too are shouldering his hope. Both first-time voters, they are continuing with the family tradition.
So you're going to vote for them? Yeah, obviously.
Aldrin Sampear, Harare, Zimbabwe.
And for many of those waiting there and around the country, it is now a waiting game. Zimbabweans are on edge tonight with their future up in the air. Let's get the mood on the ground in Harare. eNCA's Aldrin Sampear is live in the capital at the results centre. You've heard it being called monumentous, historic, whatever it is for you. It is certainly a big and important day. How's it played out there, Aldrin?
Well, certainly a very important day for Zimbabweans who have gone to the polls. Polling stations have now closed around about 7 o'clock, and it's now down to the counting. The counting that will give us the results, which will be the indicator of who the leader of Zimbabwe will be. Although there are 3 ballots that are being cast, the one for local government as well as the National Assembly, the focus of these elections have been the presidential race. And more specifically, 2 people have been the key focus and the front runners, and that is Nelson Chamisa as well as Emerson Mnangagwa, who both cast their ballots today. Emerson Mnangagwa who cast his ballot in Kwekwe, as well as Nelson Chamisa who cast his ballot here in Harare. And tell you what, Jane, earlier on in the morning at that school, it was a hectic scrum, something that I've never seen before. Many media houses, cameras all over the place, taking film and taking pictures of Nelson Chamisa as he was casting his ballot. And the moment when he tried to speak to the media as well, everyone wanted a bite from Nelson Chamisa. And the key question out of that press briefing, or impromptu press briefing that he had, was the issue around this complaint that the Electoral Commission has now laid against him. And earlier on we heard from the Electoral Commission chairperson Chikumba, who indicated that there are actually 2 presidential candidates whom the Electoral Commission has laid a complaint against, but she wouldn't indicate who that second person is, even though we put it to her that yesterday the Electoral Commission was confident enough to announce or make public who the complaint was against. The first one, that was Nelson Chamisa, but they wouldn't say who the second one was against, and she was saying that it is in the interest of peace in the country, and today is voting day, and that should be the focus.
excitement when he was there and when he tried to speak. But what about Robert Mugabe? I mean, you heard screams of enthusiasm and support. So tell us about that and who he possibly voted for.
I would say three key players actually in these elections. It is the former president of Zimbabwe, Robert Mugabe. It is the current president of Zimbabwe, Emmerson Mnangagwa, as well as the leader of ZANU-PF and Nelson Chamisa. And if we could just split three screens, have a three-way screen split of what was happening during those incidents, it was a stark contrast. For instance, when Robert Mugabe was voting, you also had a media scrum there, and then when Nelson Chamisa was voting as well, as I indicated, a media scrum, but not so much for Emmerson Mnangagwa, the president of the country. One would have expected that there may have been a lot of interest in watching the president cast his ballot for the first time as the president of the country, but not so much. But one thing that we must indicate as well is that Kwekwe, which is about 212 kilometers away from Harare, it's quite a distance away from the city center. So you wouldn't expect the people around that area, a lot of people in that community, to be making their way around that polling station where the president was casting his ballot.
Okay, let's leave it there. Aldrin Sampear live from Harare. Still ahead, reporters from around the globe are on the ground covering the story freely, but the local press say they are not the case for them. That's not the case for them. When we get back live to Zimbabwe, we'll discuss that with our guest.